Welcome back. Michael Brooks on the Majority Report. That was Chronics and Protege. And joining us now is Douglas Lain. He's the author of Bash Bash Revolution. He's a publisher at Zero Books and host of the Zero Books podcast, which you can find both on iTunes and also a lot of very good video content on YouTube. Doug, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So, Doug, you are the perfect person to talk to about this because just as I was saying in the intro, I've been spending a lot of time on this show and my show talking about the fallout of the Iran deal, the implications for Syria, for Yemen, for a broader, crisis in the Middle East and even really the future of the foundations of arms control. But it's very easy to get lost in sort of trivial ideas and issues like that in the face of the really, really important stuff, which is that there are a group of sort of mid-rank pundits who some college students don't like. So, clearly there's obviously much bigger things going on. And that takes us to this, sort of unintentionally comical piece that Barry Weiss came out with a couple of days ago called, it was something like Meet the Renegades of the Dark Web. And it's, an introduction to a cast of characters, Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, Sam Harris, and I think Michael Shermer and Joe Rogan. And basically a group of guys who are sort of constantly protesting that they're, underexposed and underrepresented, even as they, you just can't avoid them, from the New York Times to Bill Maher to endless YouTube and Twitter algorithms. I've never seen such ubiquitous silenced people in my life. And that actually, you put out a very insightful video recently on this sort of the kind of free speech hustle aspect of this, and these sort of people building brands on, equating being criticized with being silenced, and then using a discourse of freedom of speech, which has nothing to do with what's actually taking place, thereby polluting the term in the process.
Right. I mean, I got a little bit of pushback for that particular video because there are a few people who I showed pictures of in video who I guess have actually been either fined or in some way or another sanctioned by the state for things they've said. And I just want to make it clear, I am against state censorship. Mm-hmm. And the left in general is against state censorship. But what happens is that they transform issues that are difficult into issues around free speech. In other words, when you wade in on a question that's difficult and fraught with emotion, you're going to get a reaction. And they turn that reaction into a reason to claim to be martyrs and a reason to claim to be suppressed. And they've done a good job. I mean, when he was still around, Milo did a really good job of getting the kind of reaction that looked foolish on YouTube,
right,
in order to kind of launch his career. They're smart enough to know about the Streisand effect or to use it when it happens.
What's the Streisand effect?
Well, Barbara Streisand sued a photographer for having taken photos of her house. He was actually a landscape photographer. I think he was doing a survey of the coast, and she had, her mansion was part of the one of the places that got photographed was included her property, and she found out about these photographs existing on a website, I think, and sued the photographer for invasion of privacy. And what happened was a website that had something like 3 views and was really not significant became very popular, and it got millions of views because of the lawsuit. So by trying to suppress this guy's photography, she ended up drawing attention to the photographs of her house that she was trying to obscure, and that's the Streisand effect.
Right. So what? Let's pick this apart. We'll sort of take it from micro to macro here. So yes, there is the element, and you published Angela Nagle's book "Kill All Normies," a very good book that kind of captured some of the dynamic of how these people were able to leverage a certain type of, for lack of a better word, call out culture and leverage reactions that just looked bad from a brand perspective to sort of advance themselves and make their critics look foolish at times. That's kind of it's an important conversation, but it's kind of an older conversation. It's also become its own cliche. So maybe like a couple, it was important, I think, for those of us on the left to say, and I still do, just performatively, like, you want to go embarrass Ben Shapiro. Well, do it right. Don't have a meltdown. And, that's what he's looking for. But I think
Right.
that message has kind of registered. And so now we're actually much more clearly confronted with, in most cases, and barring like state fines and so on, which I agree with you on. But in most cases, just this sort of bare cynicism of the move that these people make. And one of the examples of it in a specific way that we were just talking about in the office during prep was, as an example, someone like Sam Harris will say, calling somebody as a racist is a thought stopper. It's a conversation ender, because it's, particularly in his case, he's someone he's one of the ones on this side of the conversation that's very fixated and very, I don't know if it's just egoically and emotionally aggrieved, or actually he's concerned about his brand's position, but he's very, very freaked out that he would get painted with a brush of bigotry, even as he dips into, everything from, retrograde foreign policy and sort of totalizing statements about Muslims to, pushing, IQ and genetics, racial stuff, right? So, but yet
Right.
being called out on that, freaks him out, even though obviously he's entirely in traditions of bigotry on those grounds. But the point that we were making was that, in a very different way. So, like, we were Bernie Bros, and Bernie Bros actually, we got accused of sexism and racism and these sort of things in, sloppy and dishonest and ridiculous and disingenuous ways all the time. And it wasn't a thought stopper, because in this case, or conversations, we were able to say, well, actually, no, that's inaccurate, and explain why. And what I wonder, and that's where it starts to seem like the move is actually, ironically, just to block any exchange. Like Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, these guys can go out and say whatever they want, but then we can say what we want. And then their response is either, you're suppressing me by responding to what I said, or, you haven't followed all of the little trinkets and caveats I've put in to try to get an out for myself. And ironically, it becomes a game of hide the ball.
Right. Well, I don't know. Sam Harris, he at least tries to have debates occasionally. Although I would say that he is as much of a thought stopper as anything he complains about.
Right.
Because just for exactly the reasons you say, he gets hung up on basically issues of how he's being represented rather than what he's supposed to be talking about.
Right.
The big thing that is, though, that most of these guys who are worried about free speech, or claiming to care about free speech, aren't at all consistent themselves. For instance, Jordan Peterson wanted to create a watch list of university programs and professors that he thought were neo-Marxists and needed to be defunded. That's hardly the move of someone who cares a great deal about open and honest and intellectually rigorous debate. That's just a use of force, to try to shut down the ideas you don't like. The same thing is true of Tucker Carlson and his support for some legislation that was going to penalize students for political protest on college campuses. So these guys aren't consistent about their actual free speech position. And then the other thing is I think it's important to point out, and this is something that really bothers me, actually, is that they've all embraced, all these people on the intellectual dark web these guys that are branding themselves together in the New York Times, they've all embraced red baiting as their primary point of common interest. So, like Brett Weinstein, he's not the same as Ben Shapiro, right? Politically, they're not really aligned, except that they both are really concerned about the impact of what Brett Weinstein calls a critical theory, and Ben Shapiro would call it, I guess, Marxist or cultural Marxists, or I'm not sure. It depends, and maybe just hysterical social justice warriors. But the point is that they have their own story about what's the problem in our society, and it always comes down to their political opponents and villainizing their political opponents as part of a kind of a Jewish conspiracy, ultimately, although they, couch it in different terms to hide the origin of the idea. So I find that really disturbing, that this sort of John Birch Society idea has become mainstream enough that a bunch of people who at least dip their toe in it are being, hailed as renegade intellectuals in the New York Times.
And also the other kind of striking thing, just on a sort of basic elemental vigor level, like, let's sort of take it across the board. I mean, in some ways, like, Harris is sort of the most easy and the most glaring, in the sense that, and actually Ezra Klein did a good job of pointing out how his own constant sense of persecution and aggrievement, and his, emotional identification with other overexposed white, sort of idea peddlers who want to, promote racist ideas, as an example, without being, called as such, that is a form of identity politics. And why is it that he, as an example, could, entertain a Charles Murray, but then say that, a conversation with Ta-Nehisi Coates would just be hopeless and, not fruitful. I mean, just the sort of inability to basically disaggregate there is obvious. But the broader thing that's fascinating is that how have they been able, they've generated a narrative that not only has its roots in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, whether they know it or not, but also the fact that they, we spend a lot of time inside the left disaggregating between, what is the driver? Is it cultural? Is it economic? Is it a fusion? Universal programs, and how do they intersect with dealing with problems that persist in representation? What is our position on even things like Indeed, like the call out culture or whatever? So they're basically taking these viewpoints that are radically different, whether it be a sort of, basic kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, SJW stance or a Marxist stance. And it seems to me that they're conflating it in ways that are both not totally non-distinguishing and non-rigorous to an embarrassing degree for people who profess to be intellectuals, which I'd like you to elaborate on, but also in a way where it seems that the commonality that it just sort of comes down to is that anybody, from the least to the most sophisticated, from the most polished and the most, intellectually rigorous to the most, emotional and reactive, but that basically anybody whose position in public life is that injustice is not a good thing and we should do better for humans, that they are the problem, and we could just sort of pocket that all as Marxism or whatever.
Yeah, anyone who's dissatisfied with the status quo, that's not exactly fair that all of them think this way, but certainly Jordan Peterson, is a fighter for the status quo, and anyone who is more concerned about fighting for social justice or changes in society than he or she is about their own personal success, say, is suspect and fallen prey to a horrible, villainous ideology of neo-Marxism, according to Peterson. And so there, obviously, that's not even a position that you can consistently hold, and he himself doesn't consistently hold with the idea that you only focus on yourself rather than on social ills. I mean, he does ask his students to get involved with his own political projects, you know. But the main thing that I think that all of these people share is this desire for there to be a route to the truth that doesn't involve them. In other words, they want to be objective in a simple, straightforward way, which means that they have to take a lot of things that are part of the status quo for granted, as if they could never be changed. I mean, that's the problem with sort of this white bread liberal scientism that out there, is that, you know, it wants to claim this sort of objectivity and not see its own subjectivity. And that's, you know, I say it like that, it sounds very academic, but it's pretty simple. It's like, you know, for instance, if you're taking Charles Murray's word for what the science is on race and IQ, you ought to at least consider what your own political, social position is and be extremely rigorous and scrupulous about challenging what makes you feel comfortable, right? And that kind of observation, which maybe they nod along to, if said that way, is something that they really, on a fundamental level, aren't capable of holding on to and trying to use.
Well, right. I mean, the perfect example of that is that, you know, Jordan Peterson is out running around essentially saying that until you have your life entirely psychologically and emotionally in order, you shouldn't interface with any political or economic institutional question or debate. Now, of course, it's a delusional standpoint fundamentally, because, you know, systems work on and affect your emotional and psychological health. Like, if, you know, your earnings, your job security, you know, all of these things have a major impact on the type of things he's talking about, because no one exists in this sort of weird, you know, no man's land. But then on the other hand, yes, the amazing contradiction to say, like, well, you know, a 19-year-old who thinks it's, you know, atrocious and disgusting that, you know, they're going into a, you know, vastly depreciated jobs market with lower earnings, or maybe doesn't feel good about their iPhone being made in brutal sweatshop conditions and mined from rare minerals in Africa that fuel civil wars and benefit the most powerful corporations in the world. That you can't say because maybe your room isn't tidy enough. But what 19-year-olds can be utilized to do is, you know, terrorize teachers that might tell them something about American history that makes them feel uncomfortable. They're certainly psychologically ready to do that. So, I mean, you know, the sort of obvious kind of comedy of those contradictions abounds. And we'll get to your collision with Peterson in a second. But what I'm really interested in is, how is it that these people who are just, as you say, they're mostly status quo reinforcers, and they might in certain contexts be provocative in both good and bad, in the sense that, yes, there's a grain of truth that there is in certain very limited circles. Maybe there's a quote unquote PC culture, which is, you know, uptight about comedy or something, right? And they can sort of zero in on that and hammer that all day, and, you know, use the same handful of examples and grossly overinflate their importance. Okay. And then on the other hand, they're also actually taking aim at really good and really positive, hard-earned aspects of quote unquote PC culture. Like, it is a good, hard-earned and small social advances that, like, yes, in certain circles, you know, sexually harassing your secretary or whatever, you know, or even the fact that, like, people are stratified in those job roles along gender, that we've slowly, slightly progressed. That's a good thing. Or that we don't, you know, sort of openly promote racial hierarchies, and that's considered to be, like, not appropriate. These are actually, you know, barely the beginning of vital social advances that any decent society would hope to accomplish. So there's that. But and then on the other hand, especially with regards to things like their relations to capitalism, to markets, to using sort of scientific anecdotes, dumbed down and highly mediated for public consumption to justify income inequality and say that capitalism is somehow this natural, organic state we're in versus a decided economy. This is all reinforcement of status quo. So how are they able to do this incredible, and people point out the hilarious sort of paradox of people who constantly have exposure, constantly whining about their lack of exposure, but they're resonating with something like that hustle, that ludicrous thing is working
Yeah.
in their branding.
Yeah. Yeah. Last night I was watching, because I'm, middle-aged now. I was looking at Mort Saul from 1992 interview Roger Ailes.
Oh, wow.
And it was remarkable how similar they sounded to some of these dark web pundits today in their criticism of kind of liberal establishment types,
Mm-hmm.
and so why, but back then, I mean, Mort Saul sort of lost some of his lefty luster over time because he embraced aspects of the right, and no one was thinking that these two guys represented some hot new trend online, or of course online barely existed.
Right.
And no one was elevating them to be the new part of the new counterculture, right? So why is it that these same kind of attitudes and ideas are coming across as more controversial and more interesting than they really are now? I think it has to do, my theory is, and it's just a theory, I think it has to do with the fact that Occupy Wall Street didn't succeed. That we had economic crisis and a political crisis after that, and the left's response to it was partial, and we ended up kind of retreating into a circular firing squad and a lot of scapegoating here and there and a call-out culture of our own. And because of that, now we're at a point where just trying to return to normal sounds really hip and cool.
Yeah.
We've lived through this sort of failed attempt at change that was not brought on because people organized for it, but brought on by economic and crisis, political crisis and then economic crisis. And I think the way to beat these guys is to think more deeply and organize something like Occupy that does the job better, that gets further.
That's